Joshua Jenkins had been adopted by a couple named George and Eileen Jenkins. Back in 1980, when Joshua was still just a baby, George and Eileen took him in. At the time, they were living in Los Angeles. When Joshua turned 6, they placed him in special education classes because he had dyslexia. His parents kept transferring him from school to school, but nothing ever really worked out. There was always some kind of problem, and they could never find a place that seemed equipped to deal with Joshua's needs. Then in 1993, George decided to move the family from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Joshua was 12 at the time, and his younger sister Megan was only 7. Joshua knew Megan had been adopted too, just like him. But he loved her a lot and was usually very protective of her. By the time Joshua got to 8th grade, the school psychologist said his problems went way beyond struggling in class. According to the psychologist, Joshua spent most of his time alone and had started acting strangely. At one point, he even claimed he had spoken to aliens. And little by little, more serious signs started showing up. Some of his behavior resembled schizophrenia. His parents began taking him to different specialists, hoping someone could help. One doctor prescribed medication, but instead of making things better, it only seemed to make things worse. And as Joshua got older, his mental health kept declining. His behavior became more unstable, more unpredictable. When he was 14, he broke his father's hand with a baseball bat. Later on, George and Eileen admitted to people close to them that they were scared of Joshua. They genuinely worried about what he might eventually do. Eventually, George decided the best option was to send Joshua to a boarding school in Los Angeles for troubled teenagers. Joshua entered the school in the summer of 1995. He was around 15 years old at the time. On February 2, 1996, George and Eileen picked him up from the school. After that, the whole family went to his grandparents' house in California to spend the weekend there. A few days later, Joshua was supposed to see another doctor, and there was talk about putting him on antipsychotic medication. But the next evening, around 4 o'clock, neighbors called the fire department. When firefighters arrived, they realized the fire had started in the master bedroom, and someone was still inside. 5 bodies were found in the house. 50-year-old George, his 48-year-old wife Eileen, their 10-year-old daughter Megan, and Eileen's parents, 70-year-old Bill Grossman and 74-year-old Alan Grossman. Investigators later discovered that all of them had already been murdered before the fire started. By the next morning, news of the murders had spread everywhere, and Joshua's face was already all over the news. After killing his family, he had fled in his father's car. That same morning, a clerk at a convenience store saw the story on TV. Then, just a few hours later, Joshua suddenly walked into that exact store. The woman immediately called the police, and officers arrested him a few kilometers away. 15-year-old Joshua Jenkins confessed to everything. He told investigators that he had found a hammer among his grandfather's belongings. At first, he picked it up and walked toward the room where his parents were sleeping, but in that moment, he couldn't bring himself to do it. So instead, he sat in the living room and waited. Around midnight, he heard his father wake up. George was heading toward the bathroom when Joshua suddenly attacked him, hitting him in the head 13 times with the hammer. The noise woke Eileen up. She ran toward the kitchen to call the police, but Joshua stepped between her and the phone. Eileen still tried to get past him, but Joshua jumped on her from behind and struck her in the head 10 times with the hammer. Eileen's mother, Alan, heard her daughter screaming. When Joshua walked into her room, he hit her 14 times in the head with the hammer. Then he went into the room where his grandfather Bill was sleeping and struck him in the head 17 times. But the worst part was, none of them were actually dead yet. Joshua walked into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, went back to his father, and slit his throat. 10-year-old Megan woke up while Joshua was still standing over their father's body. Joshua walked over to his little sister and told her to lie down and hide her head under a pillow. After murdering his parents and grandparents, he started dragging the bodies around the house. One by one, he moved all of them into the bedroom. Then he picked up the hammer, sat down on the couch, and started watching TV. Later, he said he stayed awake the entire night because he couldn't sleep. Eventually, Megan came downstairs to see what was going on. Joshua told her their grandmother had gotten sick and that everyone else had gone to the hospital with her. After that, the two of them went to a store together and bought an axe. Joshua never clearly explained why he bought it. A few hours later, he threw 10-year-old Megan onto the couch. Later, he said he picked up the axe and swung it at her head like a baseball bat. Using the blunt side of the axe, he hit her in the head 6 times. Then he carried Megan's body into the bedroom beside the others and set the house on fire. According to investigators, after starting the fire, Joshua planned to drive to the family's garage in Los Angeles and kill himself there. But before he could make it there, he was arrested. Joshua Jenkins' trial began in May 1997, around 15 months after the murders. His attorney argued that Joshua wasn't responsible for his actions because of his mental condition. Joshua himself pleaded not guilty and entered an insanity defense. The prosecution argued that Joshua was deeply emotionally disturbed, but not psychotic and not out of control. Investigators also said that what they later discovered about Megan's murder was somehow even more disturbing than the murders of the rest of the family. Joshua later claimed he chose the axe because he believed it would cause the least amount of pain. But prosecutors said the crime scene evidence showed the exact opposite. Investigators found small cuts on Megan's neck. And when police searched Joshua's room, they discovered 2 hidden photographs, pictures of Megan while she was asleep. Prosecutors believe Joshua had held a knife to his sister's throat before the murder because he intended to assault her, but that things escalated afterward. According to investigators, instead of attacking Megan with the axe right away, Joshua first threw her against the fireplace and then assaulted her multiple times. The trial lasted 5 weeks. In the end, the jury concluded that Joshua had been legally sane at the time of the murders and fully understood what he was doing. When it came time for sentencing, Joshua, who had been just 15 years old during the killings, was sentenced to 112 years in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2020, he became eligible to apply for parole, but he chose to waive the hearing. He was given another opportunity again in 2021. At the time this video was made, Joshua Jenkins was around 40 years old and being held at Mule Creek State Prison. But in late 2000, another disturbing case unfolded in Washington. At the time, 16-year-old William Lamke was living with his family in a remote wooded area in Stevens County. Their home was about 60 miles away from the nearest major town. His 49-year-old father, Robert, worked as a logger, while his 43-year-old mother Diane suffered from multiple sclerosis and rarely left the house. William also had an 18-year-old sister named Julianne and a younger 13-year-old brother. At school, William actually got pretty good grades, but at the same time, he also showed some seriously troubling behavior. At one point, he got caught hacking into one of his teacher's computers. Then in the fall of 2002, he spent several months in juvenile detention after breaking into a neighbor's house and stealing money and silver bars. As Christmas got closer, neighbors slowly started noticing that nobody in the house was being seen anymore except William. Every time someone asked where his family was, he claimed they had gone to California to visit a sick uncle. But William's behavior seemed strange, especially because both family vehicles were still parked outside the house. On December 29, 2000, neighbors finally called the police and asked them to check on the family. When officers entered the home, they noticed blood stains and blood spatter in different parts of the house. And when they confronted William and asked what had happened to his family, the boy started shaking and crying. Then he confessed that he had killed every member of his family and dumped their bodies in a ditch beside a road about 2 miles away from the house. Police took William to the station, where he started describing what had happened on the night of December 23, 2000. William said he had gotten into an argument with his 49-year-old father Robert that night. According to him, his father had criticized him for not bringing in firewood and threatened to kick him out of the house because he never did anything. Later that night, after Robert went to take a shower, William grabbed a gun and waited for him in the hallway. The moment his father stepped out, William placed the barrel against the back of his head and fired twice without saying a word. After that, he walked into the kitchen and started shooting at his 43-year-old mother Diane. In the middle of the attack, the gun jammed, so he went into his parents' closet and grabbed another firearm. Diane was shot 4 times, once in the right hand, once in the right shoulder, and twice in the head. Then William walked into the living room, where his 18-year-old sister Julianne and 13-year-old brother Josh had been trying to hide. He shot Julianne twice in the back before firing another round into the back of her head. Then he shot his younger brother twice in the back of the head as well. But that still wasn't the end of it. William later confessed that after murdering his family, he sexually assaulted his sister's body before dumping all of the bodies in the roadside ditch. Afterward, he returned home and tried to clean up the crime scene. At one point, he even painted over bloodstains to hide them. 16-year-old William Lamke was later charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. His trial began in August 2001, around 8 months after the killings. His defense attorneys argued that the murders had not been premeditated and that William had simply lost control during a family argument. Because of that, they pushed to have the charges reduced to second-degree murder in hopes of getting him a lighter sentence. But prosecutors argued that the motive behind the murders was far darker than a simple family dispute. Investigators found evidence showing that William had secretly recorded videos of his sister Julie, and while she was in the bathroom. On those same tapes, police also found footage of William masturbating while watching the recordings of his sister. Prosecutors believed William's parents had either discovered the tapes or learned that he had been secretly filming Julianne. According to investigators, on the night of the murders, the family threatened to send him away to a boarding school or juvenile facility, and William responded by murdering the entire family. Forensic investigators also found evidence showing that Julianne had been sexually assaulted that same night. DNA testing confirmed that the attacker was her own brother. William later confessed to that as well. The trial lasted about a week, and in the end, the jury found William guilty on all 4 counts. The same day the verdict was announced, the judge said, "There's a monster living inside this boy," because throughout the entire trial, William hadn't shown even the slightest sign of remorse or sadness over what he had done. In the end, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the time this video was made, 40-year-old William Lamke was serving his sentence at Washington State Penitentiary. Then, in early 2008, another case shocked people in Caucusville. The Brown family lived there at the time. The father, John Brown, was a well-known and respected lawyer and businessman. His wife, Tamara, was a stay-at-home mom. Together, they had 3 sons, Nicholas, Gregory, and Benjamin. According to people who knew them, all 3 boys were polite, well-liked kids. They did well in school, played sports, and were involved in different activities. John and Tamara were almost always there at their games and events, cheering them on from the sidelines. Nicholas spent the night of February 1, 2008 at a friend's house. The next evening, around 5 o'clock, his friend drove him back home. But only a few minutes later, Nicholas suddenly ran back outside and told his friend that his father was dead. The friend immediately called 911 and said he thought Nicholas's father had suffered a heart attack. But when emergency responders entered the house, they found a scene that looked nothing like a heart attack. 45-year-old John Brown was lying on the couch downstairs, covered in blood. It was immediately obvious that his death hadn't been natural. Police searched the rest of the house and quickly discovered the bodies of 44-year-old Tamara, 13-year-old Gregory, and 11-year-old Benjamin. Every member of the family had been shot to death. Investigators determined that the murder weapon was a 9mm handgun. The house had been completely trashed, but strangely, nothing had actually been stolen. Because of that, detectives decided to question the only surviving member of the family, Nicholas, who was just 1 week away from turning 16. At first, Nicholas denied knowing anything about the murders. But detectives quickly noticed something strange about the way he was acting. He wasn't crying. He didn't seem shocked. Honestly, he barely seemed affected at all by the fact that his entire family had just been killed. Police became even more suspicious after they found the key to the family gun safe hidden underneath Nicholas's bed. After several hours of questioning, he finally confessed to killing every member of his family. When investigators asked him why he did it, Nicholas claimed his father had been an alcoholic for years and had physically and emotionally abused him. As for his mother, he said she had allowed the abuse to continue. But if his anger was really directed at his parents, then why kill his brothers too? Nicholas answered that he had needed the scene to look like a real burglary, so he felt he had to kill them as well. Just a few hours after his confession, the district attorney spoke during a press conference and said one thing had stood out to investigators more than anything else. Nicholas kept talking about his family's money. Even during questioning, he constantly brought up his parents' wealth and assets. Just a little strict, but even if his claims about his father's abuse were true, there was still no explanation for the murders of his 13-year-old and 11-year-old brothers. In October 2008, 16-year-old Nicholas Browning pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder. Then, in January 2009, the court sentenced him to 4 life sentences. 2 of those sentences had to be served in full, while the other 2 could potentially be reduced for good behavior. But even in the best-case scenario, Nicholas would still have to spend at least 33 years in prison. Today, he's serving his sentence at North Branch Correctional Institution, and if his sentences are ever reduced, the earliest possible release date would be sometime around his late 40s.